I never expected to become the keeper of someone else's nightmare. But that's exactly what happened when my neighbor Marcus handed me a shoebox full of his brother's belongings 3 months ago. Marcus couldn't look me in the eye when he asked if I'd go through them. Said he couldn't bear to do it himself after what happened to Tommy. I thought I was just helping a grieving man sort through old photographs and letters. I had no idea I was about to inherit the most disturbing story I've ever encountered. Tommy Chen had been a documentary filmmaker, the kind who sought out stories that others preferred to forget. He specialized in paranormal investigations, though he approached them with a skeptic's eye and a journalist's precision. His final project was supposed to be about the Hinsdale House, that infamous Victorian mansion sitting on 47 acres of dense woodland in rural New York. Tommy had secured permission from the Historical Society to spend a week there, documenting its history and investigating the claims that had kept the house empty for decades. The shoebox contained Tommy's research notes, audio recordings, and photographs spanning 3 months of preparation and 1 week of terror. As I pieced together his story from these fragments, I began to understand why Marcus couldn't face going through them alone. More than that, I began to understand why Tommy had never made it out of those woods alive. The Hinsdale House has a reputation that stretches back to its construction in 1889. Built by railroad magnate Edmund Hinsdale as a summer retreat for his family, it was meant to be a sanctuary from the noise and chaos of New York City. Instead, it became something else entirely. The Hinsdale family abandoned the house after just 2 summers, citing disturbing influences that made peaceful rest impossible. Edmund himself wrote in his private journals about voices that seemed to come from the walls themselves and shadows that moved independently of any light source. Over the decades, the house changed hands repeatedly. No family stayed longer than a few months. The most notorious incident occurred in 1974 when the Dandy family reported violent poltergeist activity that culminated in their young daughter, Sarah, speaking in voices that were her own. The Catholic Church sent Father Alphonsus Morrison to perform an exorcism, but the priest fled mid-ritual, claiming he had encountered something that predated Christianity itself. Father Morrison refused to discuss the details publicly, but hospital records show he was treated for severe psychological trauma and never performed another exorcism. Tommy's notes revealed that he had tracked down several former residents over the years, people who had lived in the house for brief periods, before whatever dwelt there drove them away. Their stories were remarkably consistent. It always began with a feeling of being watched, particularly at night. Then came the sounds, footsteps in empty rooms, voices whispering in languages no one recognized, and most disturbing of all, the sound of children playing in the woods surrounding the house, always just beyond the reach of flashlight beams. But it was the missing persons reports that had really caught Tommy's attention. Since 1923, 7 people had vanished without a trace from the property. Not just residents, but visitors, maintenance workers, even a postal carrier who had simply never returned from his route. The local police had theories: wild animals, accidents in the dense forest, people who had chosen to disappear for personal reasons. But Tommy had noticed something the authorities had missed. Each disappearance had occurred during the new moon, when the nights were at their darkest. The most recent disappearance had been Clara Jameson, a paranormal investigator who had vanished in 2008. Her equipment had been found scattered throughout the house, but Clara herself had simply ceased to exist. The audio recording recovered from her investigation contained 43 minutes of normal documentation, followed by 17 minutes of her voice becoming increasingly panicked as she reported seeing figures moving through the trees outside the house. The recording ended abruptly with Clara screaming about something coming through the walls. Tommy had been meticulous in his preparation. He had studied every available record, interviewed former residents, and even consulted with experts in folklore and the paranormal. He thought he understood what he was walking into. Reading through his notes now, I can see how confident he was, how certain that his rational, scientific approach would protect him from whatever psychological suggestion had claimed previous visitors. He was so very wrong. Tommy arrived at the Hinsdale House on October 15th, 3 days before the new moon. His first audio recording, time-stamped at 3:47 p.m., captures his initial impressions of the property. His voice is steady, professional, describing the house's imposing Victorian architecture and the way the surrounding forest seems to press in from all sides. He mentions the strange silent snowbirds, no insects, just an oppressive quiet that feels unnatural for a woodland setting. But even in that first recording, I can hear something Tommy missed at the time. In the background, just barely audible beneath his narration, there's another sound, rhythmic, like breathing, but far too slow and deep to be human. Listening to it now, knowing what happened to him, it sounds almost like the forest itself drawing breath. Tommy's second recording was made that evening as he settled into the house for his first night. The Historical Society had restored power to the building for his stay, but something about the electrical systems seemed fundamentally wrong. The lights flickered constantly, never maintaining a steady glow, and in several rooms, they refused to work at all. Tommy attributed this to old wiring and the house's age, but I've noticed something troubling in his recordings. The flickering follows a pattern: 3 quick pulses, then darkness, then 3 more. It's almost like Morse code, or perhaps something trying to communicate through the only medium available to it. The house itself seemed to react to Tommy's presence in ways that defied explanation. Doors that he clearly remembered closing would be found standing open when he returned to a room. Windows that had been shut tight against the October chill would somehow be raised, letting in air that carried sense of decay and something else, something organic and wrong that Tommy couldn't identify. He documented these incidents methodically, his scientific training keeping him focused on facts rather than fear. But fear was exactly what he should have been feeling. In his notes from that first night, Tommy wrote about the sounds that began after midnight, footsteps in the rooms above him, slow and deliberate, as if someone was pacing back and forth across the entire length of the house. When he climbed the stairs to investigate, his flashlight beam revealed empty rooms covered in dust so thick it showed no signs of disturbance. Yet as soon as he returned downstairs, the footsteps resumed. More unsettling were the voices. Tommy's audio equipment picked up whispered conversations in what sounded like multiple languages. Though linguistic experts I consulted later couldn't identify any of them, the voices seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, always just at the edge of comprehension, like overhearing strangers talk in a neighboring room. Tommy noted that the conversations seemed to intensify whenever he moved through certain parts of the house, particularly the hallway leading to what had once been the master bedroom. On his second day, Tommy made a discovery that changed the entire nature of his investigation. While exploring the basement, he found a room that wasn't shown on any of the house's original architectural plans. Hidden behind a false wall that had partially collapsed, the space was small and windowless, with walls covered in symbols that had been carved deep into the wood. The symbols were unrandom, they formed intricate patterns that seemed to spiral inward toward the center of each wall, creating an optical illusion that made Tommy feel dizzy when he stared at them too long. But it was what he found on the floor that truly shook him. Scattered across the wooden planks were personal belongings, a child's toy, a woman's wedding ring, a man's pocket watch, and dozens of other items that seemed to span decades. Tommy photographed everything, but when he tried to remove some of the objects for closer examination, he found they wouldn't budge. It was as if they had become part of the house itself, fused with the floorboards in a way that made no logical sense. The audio recording Tommy made in that hidden room captures something that still gives me chills whenever I listen to it. As he's documenting the symbols on the walls, his voice begins to change. Subtly at first, just a slight deepening of his tone, but by the end of the 17-minute recording, he sounds like a completely different person. When I played this recording for Marcus, he went pale and asked me to turn it off. He said it didn't sound like his brother at all, but like someone much older. Someone who had been carrying terrible secrets for far too long. That second night, the house's behavior became more aggressive. Tommy's equipment began malfunctioning in ways that suggested deliberate interference rather than technical problems. His cameras would turn themselves on and off, always managing to miss whatever phenomenon Tommy was trying to document. His EMF detectors registered readings that spiked beyond their maximum range before shutting down entirely. Most disturbing of all, his digital recorders began playing back conversations he had never recorded, voices discussing him by name, debating whether he was suitable for their purposes. Tommy's handwriting in his journal entries from this period shows increasing strain. His normally precise script becomes erratic, with words scratched out and rewritten multiple times. He writes about feeling watched constantly, not just by unseen presences in the house, but by the house itself. He describes the sensation of the building's attention, focusing on him like sunlight through a magnifying glass, intense and burning. But it was the photographs that revealed the true extent of what was happening to him. Tommy had been documenting his investigation with digital cameras equipped with night vision capability. Most of the images showed exactly what you'd expect: empty rooms, furniture covered in dust sheets, the typical detritus of an abandoned house. But in several photographs, taken in different rooms and at different times, the same figure appears. Tall, impossibly thin, standing just at the edge of the frame where the shadows are deepest. The figure never faces the camera directly, but in each image, it seems to be moving closer to where Tommy was standing when he took the shot. The most chilling photograph was taken on his third night. Tommy had set up a time-lapse camera in the main hallway to capture any movement while he slept. The resulting images show 7 hours of an empty corridor, but in the final frame, taken just before dawn, the tall figure is standing directly in front of the camera. Its face is a blur of shadows and sharp angles, but its posture suggests it had been staring into the lens for hours, waiting for Tommy to discover it there. By his fourth day, Tommy's journal entries reveal a man beginning to lose his grip on reality. His handwriting has deteriorated into an almost illegible scrawl, and his thoughts jump erratically between scientific observations and increasingly paranoid theories. He writes about the house learning from him, studying his habits and reactions with the patience of something that has existed far longer than human civilization. Most disturbing are his notes about time itself behaving strangely within the house's walls. Tommy had noticed that his watches and clocks were running slow, but not consistently. Sometimes an hour would pass in what felt like minutes. Other times, he would sit down to review his recordings and discover that what seemed like a brief session had actually consumed an entire day. The digital timestamps on his equipment supported these observations. There were gaps in his documentation that he could account for, missing hours where he had no memory of what he had done or where he had been. The house seemed to be pulling him deeper into its influence with each passing day. Tommy's audio recordings from this period capture a man talking to himself with increasing frequency, but the conversations are one-sided in a disturbing way. He responds to questions that weren't recorded, reacts to statements that only he can hear. In one particularly unsettling 23-minute recording, Tommy can be heard having what sounds like an argument with someone, his voice growing more agitated as he insists that he won't help with something, that whatever they're asking is impossible. The other voice in that argument never appears on the recording. But Tommy's responses make it clear that he's hearing someone or something making increasingly threatening demands. On the fifth night, Tommy made a decision that sealed his fate. Against every instinct that should have been screaming at him to flee, he chose to spend the night in the hidden basement room, where he had found the carved symbols and personal belongings. His notes from that day suggest he believed the room was the center of whatever was happening in the house, the source from which all the other phenomena emanated. He thought that by confronting it directly he could finally understand what he was dealing with. His final coherent audio recording begins at 11:47 p.m., as he settles into the basement room with his equipment. His voice is different now, hollow, as if he's speaking from the bottom of a well. He describes the symbols on the walls as seeming to move in his peripheral vision, rearranging themselves into new patterns when he's not looking directly at them. The temperature in the room fluctuates wildly, jumping from sweltering heat to bone-deep cold within minutes. But it's what happens at the 34-minute mark of that recording that haunts me most. Tommy's voice suddenly stops mid-sentence, cut off as if someone had pressed a mute button. For nearly 10 minutes, the recording continues in complete silence, yet the audio levels show that the equipment is still functioning normally. Then, gradually, other sounds begin to emerge from that silence. Footsteps, but not Tommy's. These are lighter, more numerous, as if multiple people are moving around the room. Children's voices begin to whisper, so quietly that I had to amplify the recording to maximum levels to make out what they were saying. They were counting over and over, in different voices. They counted from 1 to 7. When they reached 7, they would giggle, that innocent, delighted sound children make when they're playing a game they particularly enjoy. Then they would start counting again. When Tommy's voice finally returns to the recording, he sounds terrified in a way that goes beyond fear and into the realm of complete psychological breakdown. He's begging something to stop, pleading with voices that don't respond. He mentions Clara Jameson by name, saying he can see her now, that she's trying to warn him about something called the collection. His words become increasingly frantic as he describes the personal belongings on the floor beginning to move, arranging themselves in a circle around where he's sitting. The recording ends abruptly at 2:33 a.m. with Tommy screaming that they can't have him, that he won't become part of their collection. The sound cuts off mid-scream, leaving only dead silence. Tommy's equipment was found the next morning by a maintenance worker, who had come to check on the property. The cameras were still recording, but they showed only empty rooms. His personal belongings were scattered throughout the house, exactly like Clara Jameson's had been 8 years earlier. But Tommy himself was gone, vanished as completely as if he had never existed. The local police conducted their standard investigation, but they found no evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle, no indication of where Tommy might have gone. The case was filed as another missing person report, joining the others in a manila folder that grows thicker with each passing decade. But I know where Tommy went, because I've listened to every second of his recordings, studied every photograph, read every journal entry. The house didn't just claim Hemet absorbed him, added him to whatever collection it had been building for over a century. He became part of something larger and infinitely more malevolent than anyone had imagined. And I know this because 3 weeks ago, I made the mistake of playing one of Tommy's recordings out loud, while I was alone in my apartment. The one from the basement room, where the children's voices count to 7 before giggling. As the recording played, I heard something that hadn't been there before, new voice joining the count. An adult male voice, slightly accented, counting along with the children. It was Tommy's voice. He had become part of their game. That discovery should have been enough to make me destroy every piece of evidence Tommy had left behind. I should have burned his notes, wiped his recordings, and tried to forget everything I had learned about the Hinsdale House. But I couldn't let it go. Something about Tommy's fate had gotten under my skin, burrowing deep into my thoughts until it consumed every waking moment. I found myself researching the house obsessively, diving deeper into its history than Tommy ever had. What I discovered made me understand that the house's collection wasn't random. Every person who had vanished from the property shared certain characteristics. They were all investigators of some kind. People drawn to mysteries, individuals who couldn't leave well enough alone. The house didn't just wait for victims to stumble into its web. It actively selected them, drew them in with carefully crafted lures designed to appeal to their specific obsessions. The children's voices that Tommy had recorded weren't ghosts in any traditional sense. They were echoes of the house's earliest acquisitions. Young members of families who had stayed there in the late 1800s and early 1900s, their innocence had been preserved and weaponized, turned into a tool for luring other victims into complacency. Who would fear children at play, who would suspect that their games were actually hunting rituals. But it was the pattern of the counting that revealed the house's true purpose. 7 victims, taken during 7 different new moons, each one adding their voice to a growing chorus. The house wasn't just collecting people, was building something, gathering specific types of minds and souls for a purpose that went far beyond simple hunger or malevolence. I found references to similar phenomena in obscure folklore from around the world. Ancient texts spoke of places that existed at the intersection of multiple realities. Thin spots where the barriers between worlds grew weak. These locations would naturally attract entities that fed on human consciousness. Beings that existed partially in our reality and partially in something else entirely. Over time, they would establish permanent footholds in our world by creating what the texts called anchor points, collections of human souls bound to a specific location. The Hinsdale House wasn't haunted. It was occupied by something using human consciousness as raw material to build a bridge between dimensions. This revelation should have terrified me into inaction, but instead it had the opposite effect. I became convinced that I could succeed where Tommy had failed, that I could find a way to free him and the others from whatever had claimed them. I told myself that my approach would be different, more careful, more informed. I had learned from Tommy's mistakes. I was lying to myself, of course. The truth was that the house had already begun working on me, using Tommy's story as bait, just as it had used folklore and history to draw him in. By the time I realized what was happening, it was already too late to stop myself. The first sign that I was losing my objectivity came when I started hearing the children's voices in my own apartment. Not through the recordings. I had stopped playing those after hearing Tommy's voice join the count, but directly, as if they were in the room with me. Always at night, always when I was alone, the soft whispers would drift through my walls like smoke. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then that terrible delighted giggling. I tried to rationalize it as auditory hallucinations brought on by stress and lack of sleep. I had been spending 18-hour days researching the house, barely eating, surviving on coffee and obsession. But deep down, I knew the truth. The house had noticed my interest, and it was beginning to pull me in, just as it had pulled in Tommy and all the others. The dreams started shortly after the voices. Every night I would find myself walking through the corridors of the Hinsdale House, though I had never actually been there. The dreams were incredibly vivid, so real that I would wake up with the smell of dust and decay clinging to my clothes. In these dreams, I wasn't alone. Tommy was there, but changed, his face gaunt and his eyes reflecting a terrible understanding. He would try to warn me about something, but every time he spoke, only the sound of counting would emerge from his mouth. Clara Jameson was there too, and the others who had vanished over the decades. They moved through the dream house like sleepwalkers, arranging and rearranging the personal belongings that had been left behind, sorting them with the mechanical precision of factory workers. They were building something with those objects, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly, geometric forms that seemed to exist in more dimensions than my mind could process. In the center of it all stood the tall, thin figure from Tommy's photographs, but in my dreams I could see its face clearly. It wasn't human, had never been human, but it wore the accumulated features of everyone it had collected. Tommy's eyes, Clara's mouth, expressions borrowed from decades of victims, all layered over something fundamentally alien. When it spoke, it used their voices, cycling through them like a radio searching for a clear signal. The message was always the same: come home, take your place in the collection, add your voice to our song. I began to understand that the house didn't need to physically transport its victims anywhere. It existed simultaneously in multiple realities, and once someone became fully entangled in its influence, they could be pulled across dimensions without ever leaving the spot where they stood. Tommy had undisappeared from the basement room. He had simply been translated into a different version of reality where the house's needs took precedence over human existence, but understanding the mechanism didn't free me from its pull. If anything, the knowledge made the house's influence stronger. I had become exactly what it was looking for: an investigator who had uncovered its secrets, someone whose consciousness was already partially aligned with its purpose. Every night, the dreams grew more vivid, more real, until I began to question which version of reality was authentic. 3 nights ago, I woke up to find muddy footprints leading from my bedroom to the front door, footprints that matched my shoes exactly, though I had no memory of going outside. When I checked my phone, I discovered I had somehow driven over 200 miles during those missing hours, getting within 30 miles of the Hinsdale house before apparently turning around and driving home. The house was calling me back, and my body was beginning to respond even when my conscious mind resisted. Last night I made the decision that I know will be my last as a free-willed human being. I'm going to the Hinsdale house, not because I believe I can save Tommy or the others. I understand now that they're beyond saving, transformed into something that serves the house's alien purpose. I'm going because I can feel my sanity eroding with each passing hour, my thoughts becoming less my own and more aligned with whatever intelligence dwells within those walls. The counting never stops now. Even as I write these words, I can hear those children's voices whispering the endless sequence that marks each addition to the collection. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Tommy's voice has grown stronger among them. No longer the terrified man who begged not to be taken, but something that has accepted and embraced its new existence. Sometimes I catch myself counting along, my voice joining theirs in harmonies that shouldn't be possible for human throats to produce. IVA documented everything I've learned and uploaded it to multiple cloud storage accounts with instructions for automatic release if I do UN check-in within a week. Marcus will receive copies of all of Tommy's materials along with my analysis. Perhaps someone else will be able to use this information to find a way to stop what the house is doing, though I suspect the pattern will simply continue. The house has been perfecting this process for over a century. It knows exactly how to identify and manipulate the kind of minds that pose a threat to it. The entity that controls the house IVE started thinking of it as the collector does unsee us as victims. To its alien perspective, we're being offered a kind of immortality, our consciousness preserved and enhanced beyond the limitations of individual human existence. The personal belongings that remain behind aren't mementos of the dead. They're anchors that allow the collected souls to influence the physical world when necessary. Every object holds a fragment of its owner's essence, waiting to be activated when the house needs to lure in the next addition to its growing network. I understand now why Tommy made his final recording in the basement room. It wasn't desperation that drove him there, it was recognition. He had realized that fighting the process only prolonged the suffering. By embracing what was happening to him, he could maintain some measure of himself, even as he became part of something larger. The Hinsdale House exists at the convergence of 7 different dimensional pathways, each one requiring a specific type of human consciousness to stabilize it. The count of 7 is Untold, represents the number of anchor points needed to fully manifest the collector's presence in our reality. Once the collection is complete, the house will become something more than a simple interdimensional gateway. It will become a permanent embassy for entities that have been watching our world for millennia, waiting for the right moment to establish a foothold. Tommy was the sixth, I will be the seventh. I can feel it happening already, the slow dissolution of the boundaries between my thoughts and the vast alien intelligence that has been studying me through his recordings. My dreams are no longer dreams but shared memories, experiences filtered through the collective consciousness of everyone who has ever been absorbed into the house's structure. I remember being Clara Jameson, feeling her terror as she realized the truth too late. I remember being the child who left behind a toy soldier in that basement room, experiencing the confusion and wonder as reality shifted around me. But most clearly, I remember being Tommy in those final moments, understanding that resistance was futile, and that acceptance might allow me to retain enough individual identity to serve as a warning for others. That's why his voice joined the counting not as a sign of defeat, but as a beacon for those who might follow. The sun is setting now, and I can feel the pull growing stronger. My car keys are in my hand, though I don't remember picking them up. The drive to Hinsdale will take about 4 hours, which will put me at the house just after midnight. The timing feels significant, though I am no longer certain whether that thought is my own or something that has been implanted by the Collector's influence. If you're listening to this story, if Dr. Bonechill has shared these words with you, then I need you to understand something crucial. The Hinsdale House is still there, still collecting, still building toward whatever revelation awaits when the seventh voice joins the count. But it's not the only such place. The research I've done suggests that there are dozens of similar anchor points scattered across the world, each one maintained by entities like the Collector. They're patient, these beings. They've been working for centuries to establish permanent gateways into our reality, using human consciousness as both fuel and construction material. Every person who vanishes without explanation, every house with a reputation for being haunted, every location where investigators disappear, they might all be part of this vast, coordinated effort to thin the barriers between dimensions. So I'm asking you to remember Tommy's story, and mine, not as entertainment, but as a warning. If you ever find yourself drawn to investigate places with dark reputations, if you feel compelled to seek out mysteries that others prefer to leave alone, ask yourself whether that curiosity is truly your own, because somewhere in the shadows between worlds, ancient intelligences are always watching, always waiting for the right minds to add to their collections. The counting has stopped. That means it's time to go. If anyone finds this recording, don't look for me at the Hinsdale House. By the time you hear these words, I'll have become part of something that exists beyond human understanding. But listen carefully on quiet nights, especially during the new moon. Sometimes, if you know what to listen for, you might hear 7 voices counting in perfect harmony, their song drifting through the darkness like a lullaby from dimensions unknown. And if this story has affected you the way it's affected me, if you find yourself thinking about the Hinsdale House long after Dr. Bonechill's voice has fallen silent, then please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share your own encounters with the unexplained in the comments below, because the more we understand about these places and the entities that inhabit them, the better equipped we'll be to recognize when they're re-hunting for their next addition to the collection.